Before we begin today's intense courtroom case, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below where you're watching from. Cases like this remind us that the truth doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it can change everything. I've heard thousands of cases in my courtroom. People lie, people exaggerate, people hide things, but every once in a while, someone walks into court carrying a story so painful they spent years trying to bury it. This was one of those cases. The plaintiff sitting in front of me was a respected hotel operations manager named Robert Kane. He wore an expensive suit. He spoke confidently. He had attorneys sitting beside him. The woman sitting across from him had none of those things. Her name was Emily Torres, 31 years old, single mother, former hotel cleaning employee. Her hands shook slightly as she sat at the defense table. At first glance, most people would assume Robert Kane was the victim. That assumption wouldn't last long. The lawsuit seemed simple. Robert claimed Emily had spread false accusations that damaged his reputation and cost him career opportunities. According to the lawsuit, Emily had made statements to former co-workers suggesting Robert abused his authority and threatened employees. Robert wanted compensation, public retraction, and legal penalties. His attorney stood confidently. Your Honor, my client has spent 20 years building a professional reputation. The defendant has spread malicious falsehoods designed to destroy that reputation. The attorney sat down. Robert nodded. Then I turned toward Emily. She looked terrified, not angry, not confident, terrified, the kind of fear that doesn't disappear when someone leaves a room, the kind that stays with you. Mrs. Torres, I said, did you make these statements? Emily swallowed hard. Her voice barely came out. Yes. The courtroom stirred. Robert's lawyers smiled. But then Emily continued. And they're true. The smiles disappeared. Immediately, Robert looked straight ahead, not at Emily, not at me. Straight ahead. That caught my attention. Years on the bench teach you something important. People who are falsely accused usually want to look directly at their accuser. Robert wouldn't even turn his head. Emily's hands trembled. I could see she was fighting back tears. Then she said something that instantly changed the atmosphere. I stayed silent for 5 years. The courtroom became quiet. Emily lowered her eyes. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would go away. Nobody spoke, she continued. But it never went away. Now the room was listening, every person, every lawyer, every reporter. Emily explained that she began working at the luxury Grand Crescent Hotel when she was 22. At the time, she was supporting her younger brother and helping her sick mother pay medical bills. She needed the job desperately. Losing it wasn't an option. For years, she worked long shifts cleaning rooms, sometimes 12 hours, sometimes 14. The work was exhausting, but she never complained. Then Robert Kane became her supervisor. Emily paused. The courtroom waited. Then she looked directly at Robert for the first time, and Robert finally looked at her. The tension was immediate, heavy, uncomfortable. Emily's voice cracked. He knew I couldn't afford to lose my job. The courtroom remained silent. Robert's attorney immediately objected. But I allowed her to continue, because something about her story felt genuine, painfully genuine. Emily explained that Robert controlled schedules, promotions, overtime hours, and recommendations. Employees depended on him completely, and according to Emily, he knew it. One day she received fewer work hours, then fewer again. She asked why. Robert allegedly told her, people who cooperate get opportunities. The room became uncomfortable. Emily looked down for several seconds. She couldn't continue. Then she finally did. She described years of intimidation, years of pressure, years of fear, not because she thought nobody would believe her, because she believed everyone would believe him, the successful manager, the respected executive. The man with power, meanwhile, she was simply a cleaning employee trying to survive. Then Emily revealed something that shocked the courtroom. She never reported him, not once. Robert's attorneys immediately jumped on that fact. Exactly. One lawyer stood. If these allegations were true, why didn't she report them? The question hit hard. The courtroom waited. Emily slowly reached into her purse, then pulled out an old employee badge, worn, scratched, faded from age. She held it up, and suddenly tears filled her eyes. This badge paid my mother's hospital bills. Silence, Dumble, silence. My little brother ate because of this badge. Another pause. We kept our apartment because of this badge. Several spectators lowered their heads. Emily looked directly at the attorney. What would you have done? The courtroom went completely still. Nobody answered. Because everybody understood, fear isn't always about danger. Sometimes fear is about survival. Then Emily revealed something nobody expected. 3 years after leaving the hotel, she started receiving anonymous messages, threatening messages, mass warning her to stay quiet. Robert immediately looked toward his attorneys. Emily noticed, so did I. Then she slowly opened a folder. Inside were copies of dozens of messages, no names, no signatures, no proof of who sent them. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Every time she spoke to someone from the hotel, another message arrived. The room became tense, very tense. Robert's attorney stood. This proves nothing. Maybe he was right, maybe he wasn't. But then Emily said something that changed everything. I know it doesn't. The room became silent. She took a deep breath, then looked directly at me. That's not why I'm here. I leaned forward. Then why are you here? Emily's answer came immediately, because she had clearly been waiting years to say it. I'm here because someone finally found the records. The courtroom froze. Robert Kane stopped moving. Completely. For the first time all day, he looked nervous, really nervous. Then Emily slowly turned toward the courtroom doors and said, she's outside. The room became silent. Every eye turned toward the entrance, because whoever she was had just made Robert Kane afraid. And for the first time since the hearing began, I had a feeling this case was much bigger than a reputation lawsuit. The courtroom remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every eye was fixed on the courtroom doors. Robert Kane had entered that morning looking untouchable. Now he looked worried, really worried. I noticed something else too. For the first time all day, he wasn't looking at Emily. He was staring at the doors, waiting, almost dreading what might happen next. Emily sat quietly. Her hands still trembled. But something had changed. The fear that had followed her throughout the hearing seemed smaller now, not gone, but smaller because for the first time in years, she wasn't standing alone. I leaned forward. Who is outside? Miss Torres? Emily swallowed, then answered, someone who worked there before me. The courtroom became even quieter, a former employee. That didn't sound dramatic. But Robert's reaction suggested otherwise. Then the doors opened slowly. A woman entered, mid-50s, gray blazers. Professional posture, calm expression, no attorney, no media attention, no attempt to impress anyone. She carried a cardboard archive box. The moment Robert saw her, his face changed completely. The woman walked directly to the witness stand. I asked her to identify herself. My name is Sandra Whitmore. Several reporters immediately started writing. The name clearly meant something. I asked her occupation. Sandra took a deep breath, then answered. I was the Human Resources Director at the Grand Crescent Hotel for 11 years. The courtroom exploded with whispers. Even Robert's attorneys looked uncomfortable. Because suddenly this wasn't one employee making accusations. This was the former HR director. Sandra calmly took the oath, then sat down. I asked why she was here. Her answer came immediately. Because I made a mistake 5 years ago. The room fell silent. Sandra looked toward Emily, then lowered her head. I should have spoken sooner. The emotion in her voice was real, painfully real. Then she opened the archive box. Inside were dozens of folders, Endplight files, incident reports, Dat Corser records, Tennel memorandums, years of paperwork. The courtroom watched carefully. Sandra removed one folder, then another, then another. Every folder had something in common. The same signature, Robert Kane. The room became tense. Sandra explained that during her final year at the hotel, she noticed a strange pattern. Employees who complained about management often experienced sudden changes, reduced shifts, lost promotions, unexpected disciplinary reports, negative evaluations. At first, she believed it was coincidence. Then the pattern kept repeating, again. And again, and again. The courtroom listened closely. Sandra then revealed something that immediately caught my attention. Out of more than 20 affected employees, most had one thing in common. They reported directly to Robert Kane. Robert shifted in his chair. His attorneys immediately objected. But Sandra wasn't finished. She pulled out another file, then another, then another. Each one contained employee schedule records. According to Sandra, employees who disagreed with Robert consistently lost work hours within weeks. The room grew uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Then came the first major shock. Sandra opened Emily's file. Inside were performance reviews. For years, Emily received excellent evaluations, outstanding attendance, outstanding work quality. outstanding customer feedback. The courtroom watched carefully. Then Sandra turned to a specific page. The date was important, very important, because it was the same month Emily claimed problems began. Suddenly, the evaluations changed completely, without explanation, without documentation, without supporting evidence. The room fell silent. Sandra looked directly at me. I never understood why. Then she looked toward Robert, and now I do. Robert's attorney jumped to his feet, but before he could speak, Sandra revealed something bigger, much bigger. She reached into the archive box and removed a sealed envelope. The room instantly focused on it. Even Robert looked nervous. The envelope appeared old, several years old. Sandra explained that shortly before leaving the hotel, she received an anonymous package. Inside were copies of internal complaint forms. Forms she had never seen before. Forms that should have reached her department but never did. The courtroom became completely silent. Because if true, someone had intercepted employee complaints before HR ever saw them. Sandra slowly opened the envelope, then removed several documents. Each one was dated, signed, official, and every one of them described similar concerns involving Robert Kane. The room erupted. Reporters grabbed phones. Spectators whispered. Attorneys looked stunned. Emily covered her mouth because for years she believed nobody had ever complained. Now she was learning she wasn't the only one, not even close. Sandra continued. These complaints disappeared. Another pause. They never reached HR. Another, they were never investigated. The courtroom became electric. Then I asked the question everyone wanted answered. How many complaints? Sandra looked down at the paperwork, then answered. 7. The room gasped. 7, not 1, not 2, 7. And according to Sandra, every complaint vanished, every single one. Robert's face had become pale. His confident attitude was gone, completely gone. Then Sandra looked toward the courtroom entrance and said something nobody expected. I wasn't the only one who found them. Silence. Davil silence, Sandra continued. Someone else has been looking for answers too. The room froze. Then the doors opened again. Slowly everyone turned. A second person entered. A former hotel employee. Then another. Then another. 3 former workers, standing side by side. Their eyes fixed on Robert Kane. And suddenly the entire courtroom realized something terrifying. Emily Torres was never the only person with a story. She was simply the first person brave enough to tell it. And Robert Kane knew it. The courtroom had never felt quieter. Not because people weren't there, because nobody knew what to say. 3 former hotel employees stood near the witness stand, each of them staring at Robert Kane, the man who had walked into court believing he was the victim, the man who now looked like someone watching his entire world collapse. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then I asked the first former employee to step forward. Her name was Lisa Morgan, 38 years old, former housekeeping supervisor. She took the oath, then sat down. I asked her why she came. Lisa looked directly at Robert. The expression on her face wasn't anger, it was disappointment. The kind of disappointment that takes years to form. Then she spoke. I quit because nobody would listen. The room became silent. Lisa explained that years earlier she had reported concerns about Robert's behavior. Not once, multiple times. Every complaint disappeared. Every meeting went nowhere. Every warning was ignored. Then she was suddenly transferred. Less pay, less responsibility, less opportunity. The message was clear. Stay quiet or leave. Eventually she left. The second witness told a similar story, then the third. Different years, different departments, different circumstances. But the same pattern. Every road somehow led back to Robert Kane. By now, the courtroom looked completely different from the one that had started that morning. Nobody was focused on Emily anymore. The entire room was focused on Robert. And Robert knew it. His attorneys knew it too. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sandra Whitmore, the former HR director, requested permission to present one final document. The courtroom immediately became silent because everyone sensed this was important, very important. Sandra slowly removed a thick folder from the archive box. Unlike the others, this folder had never been opened. The seal was still intact. The room watched carefully. Sandra looked toward me, then explained. This file was discovered during the hotel's ownership transition last year. The room listened. It was hidden inside a locked storage side cabinet scheduled for disposal. Robert stopped moving completely. Sandra continued. Nobody knew it existed. Then she opened the folder. Inside were original complaint summaries, not copies. Originals signed, dated verified, the courtroom gasped because every complaint contained notes, Tinnell notes. And many of those notes carried the same instruction, the same phrase, repeated over and over. Sandra read it aloud. Do not escalate. Silence. She turned another page. Handle informally. Another page. No further action. Another. Close file. Again and again. And again. The courtroom felt sick because suddenly it wasn't one complaint or two. It was a system, a pattern, a culture of silence. Then Sandra reached the final page. The page that made even Robert's attorneys stare at the table. It was a handwritten memo, short, Sybil signed, Robert Kane. The courtroom held its breath. Sandra read it aloud. If employees are unhappy, they can leave. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room was frozen because that sentence explained everything. Every complaint, every ignored warning, every employee who walked away feeling powerless. Then something happened nobody expected. Robert stood up. His attorneys immediately tried stopping him, but he ignored them. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked around the courtroom, at Emily, at Sandra, at the former employees, at me. Finally, he spoke. And what happened next shocked everyone. He didn't deny the documents. He didn't call anyone a liar. He didn't blame the witnesses. Instead, he said, I never thought it would come back. The room froze. Basilial silence. Robert lowered his head. I thought everyone had moved on. Emily immediately began crying. Several spectators did too, because that sentence revealed something important. He knew. He had always known, Robert continued. I told myself it wasn't serious. His voice shook. I told myself they would forget. Another pause, then he looked toward Emily, for the first time all day, directly at her, and quietly said, I was wrong. The courtroom remained silent, but the damage was already done. Not because of the confession, because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. 5 years of fear, 5 years of silence, 5 years of carrying a burden alone, and now everyone could see it. Emily wasn't fighting for money. She wasn't fighting for fame. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting to be believed, and she finally was. The courtroom sat in silence while Robert returned to his chair. His attorneys looked defeated, because there was no defense left. Not anymore. Then I delivered my ruling. I looked toward Emily, then toward Robert, then toward the witnesses, and finally toward the crowded gallery. In this courtroom, I said, power has been discussed repeatedly today. The room listened. But power is not the ability to make people afraid. Silence. Power is not the ability to silence people. Another pause. And power is certainly not the ability to make problems disappear. The courtroom remained still. I looked directly at Emily. Real courage is telling the truth when you believe nobody will stand beside you. Emily began crying again. The witnesses nodded. Then I looked toward Robert. And real accountability begins when excuses end. Nobody spoke, because nobody needed to. The truth had already won. The lawsuit was dismissed, completely. But the most powerful moment happened after the hearing ended, not during it. As people prepared to leave, Emily gathered her belongings. Quietly, the same way she entered. Then one of the former employees approached her, then another, then another. Before long, all 4 women were standing together, talking, crying, logging through tears. For years, each of them believed they were alone. Now they knew they weren't. And sometimes that's the beginning of healing. As the courtroom slowly emptied, I watched Emily walk toward the exit. For the first time all day, she wasn't looking down. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't hiding. She walked out of that courtroom with her head held high, and in all my years on the bench, I've learned something important. The truth doesn't always arrive when we want it to. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes courage. Sometimes it takes one person willing to speak first. But eventually, the truth arrives, and when it does, fear loses.